Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leaders series, Genuine OEM Parts and Reliability. My name is Amanda and I'll be your host for today. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them, their cultures and to elders, past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, KAESER Compressors. KAESER Compressors is one of the world's largest compressed air systems providers and compressor manufacturers. From its state-of-the-art production facility in Germany, KAESER works in close partnership with its customers to develop progressive system concepts that continually push the boundaries of performance and compressed air efficiency. The KAESER product range meets and exceeds Australians' conditions and regulations, and the standard machines are suitable for continuous operation at ambient conditions up to 45 degrees Celsius and higher. Today we will hear from two speakers, followed by our live audience Q&A, and I encourage you to send questions through to our speakers via the chat box. I'd now like to welcome our first speaker for today, Peter Eckberg. Peter is the Managing Director of KAESER Compressors Australia and KAESER Compressors New Zealand. Peter has spent over 45 years in the compressed air industry. Peter is actively involved with a number of industry associations and currently represents the Compressed Air Association Australasia on the board of the Australian Institute for the Certification of Inspection Personnel. Please welcome Peter Eckberg.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to add a few things to it. First of all, I would like to thank Engineers Australia to give me the opportunity for giving this presentation, which is very important for our industry and for other industries possibly as well. Regarding my own add-on to my introduction, I've been in Australia for 32 years and was responsible, or still responsible, for Australia and New Zealand for my company, and before that 12 years overseas, in specifically in the compressed air industry. And this makes it up to far over 40 years experience, and most of the components in my presentation are experience-based. I'm using some tables and some figures, but I have experienced firsthand a few of the slides I'm showing you. I've been also involved as an expert witness in court in relation to pressure equipment, and that was in regards to accidents and incidents. And the subject is caveat emptor. Caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. And also, when you look into the Wikipedia, it says also it means the exclusion of liability. It's Latin, but it also is a phrase which is used quite often in contracts, in legal contexts. What does it mean? The buyer alone is responsible for checking the quality and sustainability or sustainability of goods and services before a purchase. The lower price overshadows quite often the risk and the potential financial losses when deciding for products and services which are not fit for the purpose. There's a few samples I have prepared. Today we are covering primarily spare parts for pressure equipment, and pressure equipment is potentially dangerous. If serviced, repaired, or maintained by non-trained authorized personnel, this is also dangerous. So I'm also covering not only the parts, but also the non-genuine labor, which means untrained personnel or personnel which is not fit to do the job. For non-genuine spare parts being in use in our industry, there's three major impacts: the health and safety, the efficiency, and the commercial loss for the manufacturer, which has invested into R&D. What it also means, sold as is. Sold as is means the buyer assumes the risk that the product may fail to meet the expectation or have defects. The buyer is on his own when a product fails. All the responsibility is with the buyer. Spare parts is only a small part of the whole machine. In our case, in our industry, the machine is a part of a process in most cases, and the process is a result of a product and of the business produce what the business produces or manufactures. What are the motivations for using counterfeits? Counterfeits, pirate parts, we use them normally, we call them normally pirate parts. First of all, saving dollars. That's the main motivation. Buying and owning a brand, product, or a status symbol. That doesn't apply for our industry. It applies more for the consumable industry. There are two causes of counterfeits in our industry. One cause is selling it as a counterfeit and openly declaring it. This one, some suppliers are saying that's a counterfeit, that's a fake, and it's cheaper. And the second cause is selling it as a genuine product and claiming it is a original part or it's a genuine spare part. Still, the responsibility is in both cases, with the buyer. The buyer is responsible what he buys, and he has to make sure that he buys the right thing, which is not always easy. When we look at the next slide, quite often you see on the news that in Asia, some tourists bring in some watches or some products which are not the original part, and they are destroyed as a demonstration of not importing or exporting counterfeit parts. These prominent samples here, they're very hard to detect what the original, what the fake, and what the original. In this case here, there is watches, computers, jewelry, bags, handbags, and so on for personal consumption. In our industry, it's more difficult. First of all, the status symbol is not the important motivation. The saving the money is the motivation. When we want to save money, we buy some parts where you hardly can spot the difference. For example, for lubricants, you can't stamp it, you can't mark it, you can put it into wrong containers and sell it as an original. Counterpart for the spare parts, which are counterfeit spare parts, can be very dangerous. They are spare parts for machines which used in pressure equipment, and that's not very good to do. It poses a risk for health and for the welfare of the community. But the impact goes beyond commercial losses and disadvantages, but may have serious consequences. When we look at some products, our products are compressors. That's the business I'm in for many, many years. But the same applies for pressure cleaners, for drills, for pumps, for everything used in the industry. There are different expressions for non-genuine spare parts. There are pirate parts, spurious parts, or counterfeit parts. We don't put our company logo onto this slide, and well as these parts, spurious parts, or counterfeit products. We are talking today more about genuine spare parts. You can buy spare parts from reputable brands, from non-reputable suppliers, which simply have shipped some of these parts into low labor cost countries and simply copy these parts in order to make a profit from your desire to be cheap. Sometimes those the suppliers calling their products copies, but in some cases they do everything to hide this and try to make those copies look like the original and try to sell as an original for a cheaper price. I now come to the key impacts of counterfeit parts. There are a number of key impacts are the efficiency of a compressor system, the reliability, the reputation, and OH&S exposure. For financial losses, this also comes on top, which is not listed here. Financial losses not only for the supplier of the main product, but also for the owner operator of the equipment, which has been chosen to use these pirate parts. Excuse me. Example compressor compare. I have a comparison here. It's a very simple comparison. 1 bar pressure loss results in 6% higher power bills. This 1% pressure loss may be created by a filter or by a differential pressure of a filter, which is not the original part. I've been as an expert witness in cases where OH&S played a big role. For example, in a medical application, a compressor pumped hydrocarbons into the medical air, which caused the death of a patient in a hospital. This goes back to my time in Europe. I was called by the courts as an expert witness because they needed a neutral person to report about this. And what happened in the end, we found out that the hospital themselves wanted to save cost, and they had asked their own technicians to service the equipment. These technicians didn't have the knowledge, that they were not trained. They could not service their compressed air appropriately, and they applied the wrong filters, and therefore they had this kind of accident. Very sad, but that's how this was. Counterfeits in aftermarket technical sector. Most copied products and services are spare parts, or breakdown parts, or maintenance parts, lubricants, and labor. The labor is very important. In our industry, in the compressor industry, where we have pressure equipment, which is potentially dangerous, as mentioned before, we compare this with other industries. For example, every electrician needs a license, needs to be tested, needs to be trained, and has to prove his knowledge. Every gas plumber, the same thing, has to do some tests, has to get a certificate from his trade organization. When you want to install a computer system and a LAN system today, a network system today, and you want to do it commercially, you have to employ a LAN, an expert in local area networks with a license. So in compressors, in compressor equipment, you don't need any expert. Everybody can do it. That's where the problem lies. For example, when you compare also dangerous equipment, which is an aircraft, you would not want anyone without the knowledge of servicing or repairing an aircraft to repair an aircraft. However, with compressors, it happens a lot. With the car, using the wrong oil, using the wrong brake pads, you don't want that somebody works in your car like this. More key impacts of counterfeits is the loss of the, in the slide says the warranty, and then I call it the manufacturer's defects liability. Very important. And the premature failure of the main components. You see in this nice scale here, two products, two spare parts. One is the screw element of an oil-injected screw compressor. On the right-hand side, you see an oil filter. So these two items, they are part of a screw compressor. The screw element, the whole end, the whole pump, is approximately 30% of the total value of a machine. Let's say we have a machine for $90,000. This is worth $30,000. The oil filter, on the other hand, on the other side, is about $20. So some customers, they make the decision to buy some oil filters from a fuel station which physically fit into the machine, but may destroy the end, may destroy the pump. It's not worthwhile to risk the savings of a few dollars to lose the warranty or even pay for the replacement of a screw compressor element. Further impacts are production losses. Production losses, in many cases, users of equipment are not aware of the consequences. A broken filter is one of the smallest cases. So production losses are, nobody wants production losses. Consequential losses could be a bad product. For example, oil in the compressed air could ruin the finished product. Spray painting a car or spoiling the products affected by compressed air. The life cycle cost, which I have a separate slide for this coming up after that. How much does it really cost to send your staff home compared to using a cheap purchased product? So it's all not worth to save in the use of non-genuine spare parts when the impact could be so detrimental for the product. I put a small life cycle cost calculation for you together. This is a assumed product. It's a screw compressor for worth $50,000. The depreciation is $9,200. The energy cost $53,000, almost the cost for the worth of the compressor. And the service and maintenance cost $3,800. So the total running cost for 12 months is $66,000. The life cycle cost for 7 years is $462,000. The service and maintenance costs for this machine is only 5% of the total typical life cycle cost. So it's not worthwhile to go this step. And now the most important part. The most important part, does this really happen? Yes, it happened, or I have experienced it, not in Australia, but in my time in Europe. It happened in the past. It's not reported under the category of pressure equipment. It comes under general accidents. And there's statistics available from in Australia from the ABS. And I'm involved in a number of non-for-profit organizations which deal with inspections of pressure equipment, standards organizations, and compressed air associations. So typical accidents I have experienced where in the mining industry where tires have been used, non-genuine tires for loaders, the tire has burst and has killed somebody. We have accidents in other industries. I'll give you another industry. In this case here, this is the photo you see here on this slide. Slide is a photo out of an oil a manual from an oil manufacturer. This is a plastics company, plastics manufacturer, which has applied to his screw compressors for the dissipated heat and heat recovery system. The heat recovery system was fitted aftermarket. The heat recovery system uses the dissipated heat to warm up the factory during winter time. So what went wrong here? The wrong oil has been used to start with. Then the inappropriate labor has been used. The people who did the installation, the guy who did the installation, didn't have a clue what to do. It was a plumber. He didn't know anything about the dangerous situation of using the wrong oil and using a heat recovery system. The heat recovery system was incorrectly sized. And what happened in the end, we had an internal fire inside the compressor. The compressor had an implosion. The implosion caused the bursting of the hoses. The oil had the flame point was too low, caught fire. The fire was then distributed to the heat recovery system into the factory. Nobody was hurt, but the whole factory burned down. It's a long time ago, but it happened, and I had seen it, and it was not really good to have. Not good to see this. Yeah, the risks. There's insurance coverage. Insurances they normally go for root cause analysis to find the guilty party. When there is counterfeit parts involved, the insurance will not pay. I know this from experience. There's product liability. The product liability will not kick in if a product fails, and a spare part is always a part of a big machine, of a big part. It's normally a relatively smaller part, a less expensive part than the whole machine. If this part is being used, the product liability will not apply, and you will read this in every terms and conditions. Operator's liability. After the next page, there was a legal statement from a lawyer in Australia not too long ago, and the legal responsibility as well. And I will read this to you. That was an article in the Miner in some years ago about non-genuine spare parts, and accompanied the first paragraph says company directors and managers could be liable to criminal prosecution for death or injury of employees or property damage caused by faulty non-genuine spare parts. This was in an interview with the Air and Mining Equipment Institute, AMEI, some years ago. So there is legal responsibility. Supporting, that's another impact. If somebody is using non-genuine spare parts, this company or person may support illegal organizations, contributing to money laundering, maybe, or ethical reasons as well. With the money laundering and illegal organizations, very hard to say because we quite often we can't even see where these products are coming from. they're coming from somewhere, and companies, those manufacturers, they appear and disappear fairly quickly. And there's also more involved child labor, slavery, and so on. It's an uncontrolled manufacturing market. This is a risk assessment for compressor parts, which we have developed, and it gives some categories of certain parts, what the parts are, and what are the risks. And the risks are categorized into how often what the potential is of this occurs, what the risk is to the environment, what the risk is to the safety, and risk to the production as well. Summarizing, the impact of counterfeits is the compromised product and service quality, the brand reputation, very important, the OH&S risk for every company. Nobody wants to be involved in any accidents or any exposure of their staff. The product and public liabilities exposure, product losses, consequential financial losses, no real gain in using counterfeit or pirate parts. It's not worth it. It's a relatively small amount of money and risking a lot. It poses a risk to the community. It's very important. And in our industry, we're waiting for a regulation, for some sort of regulation stopping pirate parts. That finishes my presentation. I thank you very much for listening and for watching. And if you have any question, that's the time now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Peter, for a great presentation. And I'd like to welcome our second and final speaker, James Tomlin. James is a Technical Director for the Market Area of Oceania and SEA at De Laval Pty Limited. James has over 15 years of experience in the dairy sector. He leads the technical and warranty departments at De Laval, where they technically support the broader community within Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos and Malaysia, as well as leading custom large projects throughout the region. Please welcome James Tomlin.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon all. As Amanda said, I'm James Tomlin. I'm the Technical Director for De Laval in Oceania and Southeast Asia. Originally from the UK, but based out in Melbourne now. Probably have to bear with me a bit. This online webinar forum is new to me, but I'm embracing the chance to present a bit about myself and a bit about the company that I work for. Thank you to KAESER Australia for asking me to be involved, and thank you to Engineers Australia for facilitating me being here today. I've been asked to talk about the topic of genuine spare parts and the impacts of using inferior parts from my industry and from my experience. Not a sexy topic for everyone, but something that's very close to my heart. I'm from the dairy industry. I've been with De Laval in Australia for just over 5 years, and with a competitor based in the UK prior to that. You can probably tell from my accent. So a little bit about the company that I work for, a bit of a plug time. So you may have heard of De Laval, you may have heard of Tetra Laval. So De Laval is part of the Tetra Laval group of companies. We are in fact seen as the little sister of the group, but despite that, we are present in over 40 countries and have 4,500 employees globally, with our head office based in Tumba in Sweden. A long history of the Tetra Laval group. We started serving our customers back in 1878. We're all very proud of the fact that 140 years of continuous development, innovation and customer service. The Tetra Laval Group is a full solution from farm production through to the consumer. De Laval extracts the milk from ruminants, and in our case, that would be cows, goats, sheep, camels. Tetra Pak process the milk through their various solutions, and Tetra Pak and Sedal package the milk in various vessels for global consumption. High on our priority, as I'm sure it is with most companies nowadays, safety. 3 areas of safety that's particularly important to us. Safety of the operators. Important for us as a company to ensure that customers are working in a safe environment. Safety of the product, and in this case milk, transporting the milk in the safest way possible without damage. And that can be using VSDs to have a smooth control over our product. Safety of animals. Livestock, or the livestock, is the most precious commodity that our customers have. The fact that this is at the forefront of all our innovations, I believe, gives our customers a great peace of mind. So through the next 15 minutes or so, I'll aim to tie this back to the topic of genuine spare parts. So what I wanted to discuss today was the cost of reliability, as there is a cost to this, the cost of system or machine downtime, the intangible costs related to downtime and unreliability, OH&S, or health and safety, where I'm from, and the impacts and hazards. OEM services, so I'll go slightly off topic a bit and tie that into OEM parts. For me, the two go hand in hand. I've been asked to talk about servicing our clients that are in remote locations, and I've put together one real life example from my industry. A saying that I've used throughout my career is cheap is never cheap. I was looking for a good picture on the internet depicting this, but I could only find the one attached, which to me says the same thing. Good quality is never cheap. Cheap quality is never good. It conveys exactly the same message to me. You get exactly what you pay for. Inferior parts are cheaper, or can be cheaper. Good quality parts that have been tested and verified as fit for purpose are generally more expensive. In our industry, too often we get calls from our clients or our dealer network to inspect prematurely failed components. In most cases, the components do turn out to be copies of originals. As tempting as it may be to purchase something that is available off the shelf or is considerably cheaper than the industry norms, we have yet to run into a client who is glad that they made that decision, or bar none on reflection, see that as an error of judgment. So why do people go down that route of using inferior parts? Is it the reduced lead time of components, that they are available and on the shelf? Is it to increase short-term profit margins? Parts are sometimes perceived as equal in quality but more affordable? Or is it purely the cost of the component? In some cases, well, it can be between 20 and 65% cheaper than OEM parts. So in my view, why wouldn't you? Why not use them? Or why should you not use them? Non-OEMs can measure complex component dimensions, and we'll talk about valves. That's a good analogy for my industry, but they can't identify the tolerance ranges and geometric tolerances that are essential to optimum performance. Non-OEMs don't have the expertise in specific material treatments, such as hardening methods, etc. Non-OEMs lack the knowledge to select proper materials based on application. We could talk about the correct seals for valves or pumps when we're transporting liquid with chemicals, for one example. Non-OEMs don't have the expertise to conduct stress calculations to meet the variety of codes in operation. These do require extensive knowledge of sizing, materials, and quality. So I touched on it earlier, the cost of reliability. Well, there is a cost to this. There's a cost to maintaining reliability in one's equipment and or processes. Inferior parts, and I'll touch on services, do have an impact on reliability and therefore an impact on tangible and also intangible costs. From my own experience, I can't stress enough from a consumer point of view that the cost of procuring an inferior part can have a huge impact on the desired outcome of, firstly, the product and also productivity. The slide that you're looking at now, I think, is a good representation of what I'm talking about. It talks about trust, trusting in the knowledge that the parts procured are fit for purpose and have the expected life before failure. Cost of downtime, and this may be down, I'm not saying it is, but it can be down to using inferior parts or non-original parts. And some of these can be quantified: lost production, lost productivity, lost revenue. Quite easy to work out. Intangible costs are a bit more difficult, and these can be the impacts on staff and staff morale, important, damage to the brand, important, and the customer experience. And that's one thing that we use within DeLaval, the customer experience. These are all very difficult to quantify, but have a huge and potential far-reaching effects, both short and long term. Warning, buyer beware. Inferior parts may look the same or similar, but we need to look out for the telltale signs. But as a consumer, you do know if you're buying a non-OEM or non-original part. And if that's your decision, then you need to live with the consequences of that decision and the potential impacts to your business. We've all seen copies of originals in our daily lives, and it's no different in our professional lives. In our industry, this is a real challenge. The market is saturated with copies, and that could be simple diaphragms, rubber diaphragms, silicon diaphragms, and they can be purchased sometimes at a fraction of the cost of the original part. Again, going back to a few slides ago, you do get what you pay for. This is a real example of a company. I'm not saying where, and I'm not saying who. It's just one of a number of companies who sell copies of milking machine parts, from DeLaval to all of our competitors as well. So, as I said, going slightly off subject, but OEM services like scheduled maintenance based on running hours or component replacement intervals, or a combination of the two, are carried out according to OEM recommendations. Replacement of the components is just one part of the overall service. A series of checks and measures according to manufacturers' recommendations is another part, and which non-accredited OEMs may not be privy to. Protocols in our industry change from service to service. If these protocols are not completed or not adhered to, we will have performance issues and further breakdowns and downtime. Carrying out checks on certain areas or components and knowing what you're looking for can mean that potential issues are picked up prior to them occurring, and that's about preventative maintenance. Machine settings as well is another part of the service. Systems are locked to ensure that only accredited service providers who are trained, capable and competent can make changes that will not have a detrimental effect to the system and the product. Again, using accredited service providers is just as essential as using original spare parts, in my opinion, and from my experience. Health and safety, or OH&S, at the forefront of everyone's mind. The typical dairy farm is no different. It has its hazards, from pressurized hot water for CIP cleaning to acids, alkalis in the systems, motors, huge turning structures when we're talking about big rotary platforms, and the interaction with animals, and sometimes angry customers. Non-accredited service providers may not know the risks and how all the areas of a particularly configured machine interact with each other. As discussed earlier, DeLaval puts safety at the forefront of everything, and constant and mandatory internal training and external training to our dealer network and also our customers we are trying to mitigate all potential risks. because the potential risk to our customers and their staff from using inferior parts and services can have a huge effect when we're talking about the safe transport and safe use of chemicals, as an example. Touching on warranty now, within a warranty period, a system will require will have breakdowns, will require scheduled maintenance. The use of inferior parts within a warranty period will make all claims null and void with any OEM. So we started to look at this differently within De Laval. Let's put a carrot for our customers. Let's look at extended warranty periods when signing up to a service agreement. For example, we could change the warranty period from 12 months to 24 months, for instance, on the signing of a service agreement spanning multiple years. A common complaint in our industry, anyway, I'm speaking from my experience, is the customer saying, "Oh, I was unaware of the ongoing costs or the running costs." Well, let's get on the front foot with that at the beginning of this discussion and lay out the costs for the first X number of years. A good solution that we've developed is payment plans with service agreements. I think that's key to getting your customers over the line to ensure they use OEM parts and services. I personally don't understand or condone why someone would use non-genuine parts and or services whilst within a warranty period or for that matter outside a warranty period. And this is what we've done with some of our remote customers or our customers in rural locations. You'll see on your screen there a representation of two large commercial dairy farms, one based in Quang Ngai in Vietnam and one based in Merrick on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. Both plants are serviced and maintained respectively by De Laval Vietnam and our accredited Indonesian dealer. Both clients have a full and inclusive service agreement, all consumable parts, breakdown parts, chemicals, and animal health products. Agreements in these two cases include but are not limited to 4 scheduled visits per year. Scheduled maintenance is performed in line with De Laval's recommendations and guidelines. And hand on heart, I can say that this works well. We have minimal breakdowns and minimal downtimes because we're using the preventative maintenance and we're potentially catching component failures before they happen. And just expanding on that, the representation you'll see now is the remote location of that farm in Merrick in Sumatra and the location of our approved accredited dealer based in Malang on the island of Java. The client in this scenario, a huge commercial dairy farm, uses their system 20 to 22 hours a day, every day of the year. Downtime is not really an option for these clients. So what do we do in these instances? Normally at the point of sale, when we're selling the system, we include a heavily discounted set of critical spare parts to keep on farm. And in conjunction with that, what we do is we do basic training for farm staff. Some of these farms have many employees. We're talking this farm in particular, I know it well, over 100 employees on farm. So we talk to the client, we discuss what they would need for the ongoing running of their machine. So we identify that they'd need some sort of maintenance engineer, and we provide basic training so they can replace simple components to keep the machines running because components fail, let's face it. Genuine OEM parts fail. So, of course, well, you can see it, I think it's 51 hours driving, and it's probably 20 hours with a flight and some driving from our dealer to our client. And it's not always the case that a physical visit is required. Sometimes it's a phone call. Sometimes we can dial in remotely and potentially fix the issue. We have a range of options to support our customers remotely, and this is in conjunction with signing an all-inclusive agreement, whether that's via us or via our contracted partners. So we can log into the brain of our milking system, we can log into our snap chilling systems, and with KAESER, we can dial into our compressed air systems, all very important for the ongoing or for the minimal downtime, let's say. This is a 24/7 service that we provide, and it is tied into a service contract. So the last slide really that I wanted to discuss. So this is a real life example of what I'm talking about from my industry. The carbon seal for one of our pumps can be bought slightly cheaper from a variety of, let's call them, suppliers. The knock-on effect of buying this cheaper seal was a grading, which is a penalty from the milk company. I'm not sure of the exact penalty on this one, but of that. Cost of replacement seal and fitting, and that would have been via one of our dealers. The cleaning of multiple affected parts, staff wages to ensure the full herd of cows were milked after the breakdown and repair, in addition to the downtime of the machine. And that was a cost of $8,000 in total. That was the end result. The seal kit would have cost $50 from De La Val, let's say, and last for 12 months in most circumstances. And the customer saved $20 on the seal, and it lasted 6 weeks, on the seal kit, and it lasted 6 weeks. One example, there is many examples out there. So, with that said, this is the end of what I wanted to talk about and what I've been asked to talk about. And I thank you for your time and your attention. It's been a pleasure. If any of you have any questions, then please feel free to ask and I'll endeavour to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A big thank you to Peter and James for 2 great presentations. As always, it's now your turn to get involved. Please ask our questions. Please ask our speaker questions via the chat box. And if you could put who your question is directed to. A big thank you to everyone who put through questions whilst they were registering. And we might start off with some of those. So we might start off with you, Peter. And we've had a question that's come in that's asking, how can I differentiate between an OEM, original equipment manufacturer, or a pirate part? Peter.
Yeah, that's very, very difficult in our industry. But there are a few indicators where we can do this, depending, of course, on the part as well. First of all, the packaging. Some parts, they come from more professional parts manufacturers, and some they come from parts manufacturers which are not that professional. So when the packaging doesn't look like the original, then it's a very good indication. The best indication is probably the very significant price difference. If you get something too cheap, that's always definitely the alarm bells should go on, and you shouldn't touch it when it's too cheap, when it seems to be too good to be a deal. Does a part fit 100%, or do you have some? Do you have to make some additional holes, or do you use different screws, or there's some parts missing, or it doesn't look like the right thing? Then it's another indication. Where does the invoice come from? When you buy the part, the vendor you buy the part from is at the OEM. That's probably very simple to see. But again, that could be another dealer or another company who's selling the part. But that's a very good indication where the part is coming from. The quality itself, sometimes you can see the quality, sometimes you can realize how it looks like, and again, if it doesn't meet the original, and when you Google for the original and compare it, then it's also a good indication. The same as the serial number. When you place the order with a serial number, or which is the original serial number, there's some suppliers, they apply the original serial numbers, and some suppliers, they have their own serial numbers. So these are some indicators for distinguishing between a genuine spare part and an OEM part. I hope that answers most of this question.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that. And over to you now, James. We've had a question that's come in from Luke. Luke is watching from New South Wales. Good afternoon to you, asking, James, how do I best convince clients to use genuine OEM spares and not replicator parts? James.
Yeah, good question, Luke. I think I touched on it in my presentation. Let's put a carrot in front of the customer. Let's extend our warranty on a new machine. Let's extend our warranty. Let's discount a service contract. There's got to be a carrot to signing up with a service contract. One is potentially a longer warranty period, and two is potentially a decrease in the overall cost of parts combined with that full service contract. That is how we at De Laval have best mitigated as far as we can the use of pirate parts in our industry or non-genuine spare parts in our industry. And that is a global adoption that De Laval has taken. Does it always convince the client? Not in all cases. I think we've had more success with our larger clients who understand that breakdowns or downtime is going to be an issue. That's the best advice that I can really give, and something that seems to work pretty well.
Peter, do you want to comment on that? How do we best convince clients to use genuine spares?
The best is with the cost, the life cycle cost. Doing a simple life cycle cost calculation probably would be the best to do. The life cycle cost is much bigger than what the saving for the non-genuine spare part represents, and that's the best way to convince clients to go for genuine spare parts. Also, the loss of warranty, possibly, if that's applicable, and health and safety is one of the best driver for using genuine spare parts, because nobody wants to get involved in any accidents or incidents within their organization. It's I have used some in my presentation, some horrible photos, and used examples which were only one-off. That's not happening every day. It's not happening every year. There were even examples from years back. But there's little things what's happening which compromises the health and safety of the workers and of the community as well. And that's the best way to demonstrate that the real part, that risk can be minimized. And also, if really something is happening, that's the most important part. With a supplier of a non-genuine spare part, there is no insurance, there is no backup, there is no research. They're just copying something to be cheaper. That's all it is. When customers deal with an OEM, they spend money in research and development. They have their backup, they have their insurances, they have their experience, they have recalls in case something appears to be not right. This all doesn't exist. A manufacturer of non-OEM parts, of pirate parts, they're not ISO certified, but an OEM manufacturer is ISO certified. And that's probably the best driver to convince users and operators of machines to use genuine spare parts.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, and to James. And Peter, I just want to stay with you just to talk a bit about data. We've had a great question come in from Arnold, who's watching in New South Wales. Good afternoon, asking, Peter, do you have stats and facts to support whether OEM equipment performs differently? Thanks, Peter.
Hi, Amal. Thanks for the question. We have stats. We have internal stats. There is no official stats. There's no ABS information. But the stats we have, they reflect in our call-outs for breakdowns. The call-out for breakdowns are non-planned service or repair or actions we organize for our service department when the equipment breaks down. When equipment is serviced on a regular basis with genuine spare parts, this chance is very, very slim that we have breakdowns. Most breakdowns are happening when we use non-genuine spare parts, when we use non-genuine labor. That costs a lot. And we have internal statistics from simply from our service statistics, where we can see how true it is to use genuine spare parts and how little customers save in money really. They don't really saving any money by using non-genuine spare parts, because when the equipment breaks down, all the savings, they're through the wind, they're through the door. There's no way that they gain any of this savings back. When they have a breakdown, the company has to be closed, the production stops, and all of the other impacts. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. And just want to talk a little bit about supply chain issues, which obviously during the pandemic has very much come to the forefront. And a question to you, James, that's come in from Gavin, and Gavin's in the ACT asking you, James, how do we resolve the tension between the need for reliability from OEM parts and the need to mitigate severe supply chain issues? James.
Yeah, no different at the moment with De Laval. We and maybe it's something to do with our geographic location in the world, but we too have faced supply chain issues, and even now we're talking when we're importing big projects from Europe to Oceania, that we're seeing extended lead times on the sea. Recently, 4 or 5 months to get containers from Europe over to here, plus the additional fumigation issues that we're having to cope with, port congestion. So I understand it is a big problem. How do we mitigate that as far as we can? We, again, the use of service contracts helps us with forecasting of stock. We've also had the need to discuss with our dealer network. So De Laval works with a dealer network across Australia and New Zealand, maybe in the region of 50 dealers, also across Southeast Asia to a degree. The dealers have been very much on board with this. They're finding supply chain issues not just with us, but with the other companies that they use to support their business. And in the main, they've taken on the fact that they need to stock more equipment or more service parts or more breakdown parts. I don't know the full answer to it, but forecasting of stock helps. Talking to our dealership and our distributors and the need for them, and in some cases us subsidising or supporting this in some ways with extended payment options. That's how we've best mitigated it as far as we can. But yes, it is a real problem at the moment, and it has been for the last 2.5 years. And hopefully we're going to be seeing the back of that soon.
Thank you, James. And a little bit earlier, Peter, you were telling me about your new factory that's about to open up here in Victoria in the new year. Do you want to comment a little bit about mitigating severe supply chain issues too, Peter?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. We're not in such a bad position because we're always ordering in advance. We have big stock holdings. I wouldn't say that we totally excluded from that problem with the supply chain every company is facing at the moment. We have invested into a large horizontal storage machines, which are called shuttles. It's called from a company called KAESER. These are horizontal machines. They are 30 meters high. spare parts go in there and spare parts come out of there, big storage capacities. And we as a company, we have a big stock holding. So we keep always 30% of an annual supply on spare parts available, on genuine spare parts. And so we investing into the future, where we know the future will not changing much in the near future with availability of parts. Coming back to non-genuine spare parts, there's no big difference between original parts and non-genuine spare parts, because the private part supplier, they're facing the same problems. They're getting the same raw materials from the similar sources from around the world. And when there's a shortage of rubber or the shortage of copper, they have the same. They also use some materials which are facing a shortage worldwide. So there is not such a big difference. But answering your question, we have been in a lucky position that we are good stock with genuine spare parts, and we with the new factory, we probably quadrupling our stock capacity, and yes, we preparing very well for the next years.
Thank you, Peter. Focusing on equipment reliability and functional integrity, Mohammed in South Australia, good afternoon to you. As Peter's asking you the question, Peter's saying to you, I'm a big advocate of using OEM to ensure equipment reliability and functional integrity. He goes on to say there are many components which we can also get from non-OEM sources, because OEM is also using the same source. What's your view on this, Peter?
My view on this is that there are some non-OEM suppliers. When we look, maybe we have to differentiate between private part suppliers and non-OEM suppliers. Those suppliers which source some spare parts from the same sources, from the same factories, that's possible. Let's say a filter company, they produce filters. We don't make filters. We engineer filters. We design them for our features, for our machines. We do a prototype. That's how we normally work. We produce a prototype, then we introduce it to the filter companies, and they do the mass production for us for filters. Most spare parts are manufactured in-house, but for filters, example, we don't do this. This filter, for example, is a specific filter which has a bypass. It's called a run-in filter to deal with all the to cope with all the impurities in manufacturing. And the run-in filter has a bypass. When this run-in filter reaches a certain differential pressure, then it bypasses and goes into a different filter, or it goes directly back into the oil circuit, and it filters more quicker the oil. So this filter looks from the outside exactly the same like the non-genuine filter from the outside, because you can't look inside the filter. So that's only one small example of using the argument saying, we're getting the parts from the same source when it comes to a filter. Of course, there will be some parts which have less risks, like a filter. The filter is a risk for the reliability of a machine, for the life cycle cost of the machine, or for the breakdown of a machine. When we look, for example, at an electrical switch, yes, we only the electrical switch is only branded at our company name, KAESER, and you could get the same from the same factory, the electrical switch as a non-genuine part. There is not that doesn't pose a big risk. But when it comes to liability, if something was wrong with it, then of course the OEM is not reliable for any causes caused by that switch. So we have to assess always, looking at when parts coming from the same source, what risk is involved, whether we can afford it, and whether the user is prepared to lose some responsibility from the OEM, and goes his own way and covers the possible loss they have, and they have to assess what kind of loss they may have and make a decision for themselves.
Thank you, Peter. And turning the discussion to warranties, James, Margaret in New South Wales, good afternoon to you, is asking you, James, with supply chain reliability issues at the moment, use of non-genuine parts may have to be a temporary measure in extreme cases. Is this something OEMs provide for warranties in urgent cases where machines need to keep running and no spare parts are locally available for the foreseeable 12 months? James.
Good question, Margaret. My experience, well, I'll talk about De Laval. We understand that our dealer or us cannot conceivably keep all parts at all times to supply all demand that may be at that one time. And currently in this climate, yes, it is something that we have done. We would do it for a period of time. We wouldn't supply the part ourselves, but if the client can get something of a potential equal quality potentially, or our dealer may be able to source something potentially, then we would cover the cost of that part, and it would be swapped out on availability of the OEM part, again at a cost to De Laval. So yes, in certain circumstances, we would do that to ensure the ongoing use of the machine, but it's not something that we would genuinely do or generally do. We probably saw very few instances before the pandemic and the crisis that we have been in for the last couple of years. So in certain circumstances, yes, we would approve that, but it would be on a temporary basis and swapped out with the correct part thereafter.
Peter, do you have a view on that?
There's non-genuine parts and non-genuine parts. There's some parts they're coming from Siemens, for example, and they have rebranded for us. Yes, these parts are definitely exchangeable, and they don't cause a risk at all. But risk is the main factor here. It's a very big difference between sourcing a part from a reputable company, which could be a non-genuine part or an aftermarket part, or sourcing a part from a call it a manufacturer, which is a garage in Brisbane somewhere, and doing in the backyard, copying some parts for the industry. There's a big difference between this. So the variety of manufacturers of pirate parts is very, very colorful and very wide. And I would not necessarily call a company like Siemens or a company like Bosch or any other reputable companies which provide parts and supply us with parts as well and others as well as a pirate part company. They're just supplying some parts, probably to a different standard, probably slightly different or sometimes exactly the same, only with a different brand name on it. And the only difference is the liability and the source. Sometimes we receive some parts in our warehouse as a return delivery where the parts are not from us. These parts are manufactured by from a backyard operator somewhere in the world, either from China or from Europe, from Italy or from Australia or from wherever in the world. And customers complain about the quality. They complain about that the machine has failed. They return the parts to us, and the only reason why they return this part to us, they have the KAESER name on the part because the part manufacturer put their name on this part, and they don't have any other address, so they send it back to us. And then we realize this part is not from us. The tolerances are not right. The measurements are not right, the material is not right, simply the quality is not right, and then we simply have to refuse and make them aware that this part was not from us. But again, when there is a reputable company and they make a very similar product and we don't see any risk to the product, we accept it, we endorse it, especially now during the difficult times with supply chain shortages. And yes, that's I only can say to parts coming from different suppliers.
Thank you for that, Peter. And we have talked quite a bit about the cost benefits, but Cameron is just asking that question again, and obviously very important. So maybe, Peter, can you sum up the cost benefits of genuine parts?
The cost benefits are the long-term benefits. Of course, when you compare two parts, a genuine part and a non-genuine part, there will be a cost difference. Then closer the cost difference is, then better the non-genuine part may be. So if you have a part which normally costs, let's say $500, and you get it on the market for $50, where it sounds very attractive, but it's that means to be very cautious about this price difference. That can't be right. If the price difference is only minor, the chance that the non-genuine part is probably coming from a more serious or more reputable source is much bigger. The cost benefit comes out in the long run, the life cycle cost. Example, I like to work with examples. In our machines, there are all separator cartridges. These cartridges, they're in a tank, and they have the task, the cartridge, they have the task to separate the oil from the air, that we have a very good air and close to oil-free air coming out of the air compressor, which is all lubricated, not oil-free, but there's a residual oil carryover of 0.2 milligram or 0.3 milligram or so. So for the oil separator cartridge purchased from KAESER, they pay more. They pay probably twice as much or even more. But this cartridge will last around 8,000 to 10,000 hours. So the cartridge for a lesser price, for cheaper price, will only last 1,000 hours. And also the companies dealing with these parts, they recommend to their customers to service their machine every 1,000 hours. For this part of the machine, the oil separator cartridge, we only recommend to replace this every 8,000 hours. So in other words, the price advantage is for the genuine part is 8 times higher than the one for the non-genuine part, and also with the benefit of having the guarantee that you get a guaranteed and also controlled result in oil carryover, which is important for very many customers, and that's why they decide for our machines, as our oil carryover is very low. So the oil carryover of an oil-injected machine is very important for using the compressed air, because nobody wants to have unwanted oil carry over in their compressed air. It's only one example, but it's,
Thanks, Peter. And coming back to quality, a question for you, James, is coming from Lloyd. Good afternoon to you, Lloyd. James, does Delaval use any parts made by a third party, such as heat exchanger plates? And how do you verify the quality? James.
Good question. So again, how we market Delaval, we are farmers. So we have a farm based in Tumba that we do all our internal testing on. So yes, to the question, we do use third-party components, and in this case, a good example was heat exchangers, because part of our company used to be Alfa Laval. Alfa Laval still manufacture plate heat exchangers today. But with any of our products, with any of our new innovation, it is thoroughly tested at our farm called Hamra, and that's on site at our head office in Sweden. Innovation happens for us all the time, and it was good earlier listening to Peter about the R&D costs. So within our industry in particular, and figures that are circulated on an annual basis, I think last year was something like 7% of revenue is invested back into R&D within De Laval. Yes, that's quite a high proportion, and hence there's a lot of testing and verification required. So yes, fully tested, but that doesn't always negate all parts are fully tested. Yes.
Thank you, James. And just staying with that theme on the third-party parts, Peter, we've had a question that's coming from Paul, who's watching from Victoria, asking you, Peter, typically OEM parts cost more than third-party parts. Where is the balance point between cost, reliability, and risk? Sometimes OEM and third-party parts are manufactured in the same facility. How do you recommend this be dealt with when the parts are the same? Peter.
Hi, Paul. That's sometimes the case that they come from the same facility. Most of the cases, they're not coming from the same facility. When they come from the same facility, then the price may be similar. Still maybe higher for the branded part, but we put our number one reason for using genuine spare parts onto risk. Risk is the most important part. The risk can't outweigh any savings or any savings in life cycle costs at all, because risk needs to be assessed. Looking at the parts coming from the same facilities, my example with the oil filter before, where special features cannot be seen from the outside, only when the filter is in operation, and also the responsibility after the operation of this part. When something was wrong with the part, who is responsible? When you buy the part as an OEM, like us, as a compressor manufacturer, if you buy a part from us, something was wrong, we go and fix it. We fix the part. We replace the part. When you buy a part from a third party, you just buy a part from the third party, or you buy a part from the third party fixing it yourself, or installing it yourself, or one of your selected installers installing it yourself. Then there is no going back to this company and making a claim. So first of all, the risk is very important. Secondly, every operator, every owner of equipment has to make their own decision whether they can take the risk of their equipment to fail, or whether they want to spend the extra money for the genuine spare part. And please keep in mind from our presentation, the maintenance and repair represent only around 5% of the total value of the compressor. That's all it is. I don't know how it's for other industries and for other products, but for air compressors, that's 4.8% to be precise, is the average cost, maintenance and repair cost for a compressor compared to the total value of the compressor. Is it worth to make it from 4.8% to 4.6% and to risk your product or your production, or your laying off staff, or your sending your staff on leave? Is it worth it? I would say it is not, but everyone has to make his own decision on this factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And we are sort of getting towards the end of the session today, and we have covered a lot in our thought leaders, genuine OEM parts and reliability. So I just want to ask both our speakers, and starting with yourself, James, is just to give us a summary for our audience today. What are the key messages that you want to leave them with for this afternoon? James.
Well, the subject is about genuine spare parts. And as I said through my presentation, that it's very dear to my heart. Our systems run in certain applications 24/7, 365 a year. And I can't stress enough the use of genuine spare parts and the costs associated with doing that, as Peter's pointed out on a number of occasions. The cost of doing it far outweighs the cost of not doing it. So I do think we need to speak to our customers more. I do think we need to lay out the costs, the ongoing costs every year, or for the first number of years, and that is one of the drivers, I believe, to keep our customers using genuine spare parts.
Thank you, James. And Peter.
Yes, my view is I haven't brought up anything of the commercial disadvantage of the OEMs, but I want to do that closing my presentation or my question time. The OEMs, they spend money, they spend material, they're spending research development, they're spending hours in developing their products, and that costs them money. And there are some companies they're just copying these products. And I'm not talking about the companies, the reputable companies where we buy products from and they're rebranding them. This is not the main subject. The main subject is that that customers use products from non-verified sources, from sources which build their products. And my question or my suggestion and advice is use genuine spare parts, because you would not use fake money when you pay something, when you buy something, and you pay with counterfeit money. That would not be accepted. And in many industries, this is in the consumables. This is not allowed. It's illegal. When you come to customs, they take things away from you. They take CDs away from you. They take watches away from you, shoes, or any counterfeit products. Unfortunately, not in the industry. So please try to take your portion, contribute to support the industry and support those who supply with genuine spare parts. And that would be my message to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And a huge thank you to Peter and James for their presentations today. Once again, we've come to the end of the session, and I would like to take a moment to thank Engineers Australia's industry partner, KAESER Compressors, for their support. As always, we're looking for your feedback. What can we improve on? Suggestions for future events. So if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete a short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Thought Leaders event. Thank you and good afternoon.